Futurama Issue 12. Fry gets excited that he's going to the circus to make a delivery of cotton candy suits. Then Fry wants to check out the freak tent. Bender can already breathe fire and Leela's a Cyclops, so they aren't impressed by the show. Leela snarks that all Three Eyes gets you is a bigger bill for contact lens. When they're showed a five-fingered man, Fry actually is impressed, and Leela feels sorry for him. Zoidberg sees his uncle Zoid here because he answered an ad in the paper for unique performers and auditioned, and Zoidberg's happy for him. The two of them are pretty optimistic about a job where he just stands there, which is good because at least he's getting paid. Then when Fry shows off his Audi belly button, his friends are shocked because Audis haven't existed on the human body since the magazine demonized them. One magazine did that? That's pretty hard to believe. Benner's refused his offer to get rid of his Audi, and a woman in the shadows is impressed by Fry for standing up for himself. She tells him not to bother with her because there's plenty of more interesting freaks to look at. The whole story seems to be ignoring that people thought of Leela as a freak, and Leela's being a hypocrite, acting like she's not a freak. But I guess it's forgivable because it's realistic of her. Of course the bearded lady's not a freak to Fry because he can't even see it on her in the shadows. Fry needs to borrow something from Bender's chest and says he'll have to give this to her after the show. Some people in silhouette plan against Fry, and Bender doesn't want to see the circus act of a robot-human cannonball because he kept them from becoming a star. After bending school, Bender met him at a robot army bot camp and was a better chef than him. So he was told to cook a lot, and Dewey reprogrammed him to fail at cooking the generals' dinner. Part of why this flashback is so boring is that it's got sepia tone art. And part of it is that it comes out of nowhere to establish a part of Bender's history that'll only matter for this one plot. So Private Dewey got to provide some better meals, and his assignment was to become a robot that'd be shot from a cannon into war zones while wired with explosives. And that's how he trained to be the unhuman cannonball. But he was never called into action before his tour of duty ended, which is why he's still alive. Bender's jealous of him for getting to be an entertainer, so he stays outside and then confronts Dewey to beat him up. But we don't even see him do it, so there's no satisfaction. Bender replaces him in the act, and people would just assume he got a paint job and stuff, because he's a robot, so a robot could look however he wanted. They could assume he just put his mind into a different body. Conveniently, Fry gets picked in the crowd as a volunteer because he's the main character. Zoidberg was picked as well because he looks kind of ugly, and he's just happy to get attention. I always liked how optimistic he was for how sad a character he is. He may be a dangerously bad doctor, but he's still more likable than all of his jerk friends because of his attitude. The crowd gets shown a giant elephant robot that gets sabotaged to try to kill Fry. And surprisingly, it cuts ahead to a few minutes later where Leela and Farnsworth think Fry's been killed and get given his ashes. Farnsworth's sad because Fry was a potential organ donor for him, but he can just make another Cubert. In fact, if he can make a Cubert, he can make another Fry. Hermes finds a letter from Bender saying that he joined the circus. Amy makes me wonder why she'll miss him. Leela starts to leave on the spaceship, and Fry and Zoidberg fall out of the robot elephant because they were kidnapped to join the freaks because of Fry's Audi. Someone says they don't need two lobster people around. A few days later, Leela sees Zoid try to fill in for Zoidberg and gets told that her friends are still alive. Farnsworth's fine with hiring Zoid with no credentials because he would do the job as well as Zoidberg did. And Farnsworth says they need the ship right now to deliver large unmarked bills, or else Planet Express will get shut down. Leela accuses him of not caring about saving Fry, even though he just made it clear that it's bad timing. And Leela has a bunch of my time wasted with boring dialogue when all she wants to do is rent a ship. It's realistic that people would say ship instead of spaceship because it's shorter. Fry's let out to eat because when the circus grounds are cleared of visitors, the freaks are free to go and do whatever they want. If that was the case, they'd be able to escape the circus. They're given a gourmet buffet, and while they are held here against their will, they get the same royal treatment as Hollywood actors at the end of the day. Fry likes his new house and thinks the bearded lady has a pretty face, but she's drawn with a smirk at one point, so she might be evil. Why else would she get a smirk? Fry offers her a razor as a friendly gift, and gets told that her beard is vital to her survival because it covers her breathing organs with protective hair. Fry's just so used to seeing weird aliens in Leela by this point that he's able to find her attractive at this point. He says he'd like to get to know her better, and she acts interested. Leela doesn't explain why she thinks her rented spaceship sucks and hears Bender singing. And he has a show in an hour, so that's his excuse for not agreeing to help save Fry, because he cares more about this old dream of his that hasn't been relevant in years than his best friend. Then finally the comic takes advantage of how Leela looks weird too. Leela's mistaken for one of the freaks, and she asks the guard to take her to be with them, which is smart of her. So she reunites with Fry and doesn't let the bearded lady finish talking because she doesn't want Fry to stay with these people, since supposedly he's not like them despite being a freak in the future. He's even from the 20th century, that's pretty weird too. Fry's a good point standing up to her, and Zoidberg just likes the free food. Katie the bearded lady sides with Leela, not that it helps. To be fair, his friends aren't super warm and friendly with him anyways, so it kinda makes sense that he'd feel more like he belongs here. Marble tries to give Bender an interview, and Bender sees his friends in a cage behind him and wants to go to commercial. Zoidberg's excited at being friends with a famous person, being shown as pathetic, and Bender wants the cannon angle set to a lethal 90 degrees. I'm sure he'll be fine in the next issue, much like how it's immediately predictable that Katie won't be in the next issue, because it's episodic. Bender just wants to be known as the greatest cannonball artist ever. He gets shot out and takes off his mask, and the tent comes out of the ground, so his friends are distracted enough to escape. Katie says she won't come with Fry, but her crying and not looking at him implies that she's lying about her excuse for not going with him because he won't give up otherwise. She belongs here, of course she's staying. Where else is she gonna get a job? Leela thanks her for her unnecessary decision to break up with him, and Leela runs over to her ship, which got covered with a tent because of Bender, who needs to be carried into the ship. The ship gets pulled by the elephant robot, and all the freaks help Katie out so that she can be high up enough to cut the rope and have a proper goodbye to Fry. It cuts ahead in time, and Leela's polite to Fry, who knows that Katie did that for his own good. Finally, Leela points out that everyone in Fry's crew is unique, and the story ends with her reassuring him, being unusually nice to him. This story is about Fry being seen as a freak for having an outie in the future and being kidnapped to join the circus freaks in space. And eventually, Bender being evil ends up working out for his friends because his decision to replace someone who betrayed him in the Cannonball Act is what let his friends escape from the cage and all the commotion. So this is why they keep putting up with his lack of morality. I expected him to get confronted by his old enemy after he replaced him and beaten up for it at the end. But it turns out him getting hurt by his stupid stunt was seen as punishment enough. And it's explained in the show that he's indestructible. Futurama Issue 13. Bender thinks his cooking killed his friends, but predictably they're fine, and Fry has to stop him from taking his wallet. His bland food put them to sleep. Since he was reprogrammed into being the bad cook he is, it'd actually be the right thing to do if Farnsworth reprogrammed him into being a good cook. I guess this comic doesn't have continuity, so every issue's in another universe from the rest. And I wouldn't trust Farnsworth to reprogram me either. But still, if he's fine with experimenting on Fry in his sleep, you'd think he'd take the initiative of making Bender a good cook too. Couldn't he bribe Bender into being okay with it? Bender can't decide which comeback to go for, and they all pretend to be sleeping again. He decides to go to a spice market because his friends think his cooking is too bland, probably as revenge because they never said they wanted spices specifically. He hugs Elzar the chef because he saw him, and he's told to pretend he never saw him here. He says he'll delete his memory just to humor him, and it's amusing that he asks where he is because he deleted too much. He wants some spice and is asked if he's a cop because they get a discount. He says to put it all on his credit card he stole from Elzar. Hermes is surprised that Bender got some pepper because years ago, when Earth was attacked by aliens and taken over depressingly, The bad guys got offered a lot of bland food and asked for some spikes, but the pepper was too much for the invaders and they sneezed. Since then, all pepper goes directly to the Minister of Earth Defense and it's illegal. That doesn't make any sense. If anything, pepper would become even more popular because it freed Earth from an alien invasion. Those aliens obviously aren't running Earth anymore. Hermes objects to eating the meal just because it's got pepper in it, as I wish there was a real explanation for it being illegal, and the city health inspector shows up with bad timing to taste Bender's food. Leela thinks that Bender would get arrested and killed for simply using pepper. The inspector likes the food and does a scan of himself and views his holographic projection from 24 hours later, where he finds out he got poisoned. So Bender says it turns out it was smallpox and he didn't bother reading the labels. Why would he get given the wrong thing? I guess he insulted the guy? Bender gets fired because he endangered the lives of the crew, who are gonna have to deliver nitroglycerin to the earthquake planet. If he can get fired for being a bad cook, what took so long? And since he's evil, he doesn't care enough to just make robots do the most dangerous deliveries. Zoidberg wants to finish the fatal disease dinner himself, though it is implied that he's immune to diseases, with a great immune system, so it makes sense. And Fry doesn't stupidly complain about Bender being fired just because he's his friend and beg Farnsworth to reconsider, surprisingly. So that's impressively smart of him. And instead we see Bender at the hospital, and somehow he of all people got hired to be a nurse. Then we find out he buried a family at a funeral, which logically he'd get punished for. Bender was just saying there's lots of different jobs he could do successfully. So it was all hypothetical situations, but it was hard to tell at first. Because why would the hypothetical situations portray him as incompetent when he's trying to tell his friends that there's lots of jobs he could do well? It cuts to 90 seconds later, so all of that nonsense really happened. How to get hired for those jobs? He says he'll do anything for a job, and the robot devil shows up from a dumpster, conveniently being right here to offer him a job. It's a route to take that's so intuitive for Bender. It's just surprising because I'd expect him to have to go to him. We find out that Bender's friends are getting stolen from and losing valuable stuff, and Fry's the one who stole from them. And he's been drinking to try to fill the void Bender left. Why? Leela threatens him and warns him that drinking is bad for him. It makes logical sense that he'd do something bad to Farnsworth because Farnsworth's an evil scientist who doesn't care about the crew at all. But it's still a bit confusing because Fry usually doesn't do anything to bother him and even acted like he really cared about him in an earlier story. I guess he was holding it back for a long time. It's out of character and force for Fry to be acting this way. I thought the robot devil hired Bender to do that stealing. Instead, he hired Bender to be a cook because he has terrible taste in food and likes bad things because he's the robot devil. But then he supposedly dies from the food even though he's a robot. So if he's built to be able to eat things at all for energy, well, he wouldn't be poisoned because he's not organic. He's not as vulnerable. If he ate something inedible, it would get stuck in him, but it wouldn't kill him. It would just take up space. Anyways, because of this, Robot Hell goes out of business. And the robots don't bother donating much to the Church of Robotology because they don't need to be saved, and all they've ever been preached to about is the fear of eternal torment. The robots decide to leave before he can make up stuff about love that he logically would have already made up since he'd have been telling them to be good or else they'd go to Robot Hell. So he would have been preaching about love. And apparently this story takes place in a different universe from the episode of Futurama where it's revealed that Star Trek was outlawed because of Jediism. Because the robot says he's seen Star Trek, and he somehow believes that actual robots would blow up if they were taught about love, when that makes no sense. It would be the precursor to a lot of sci-fi, so it would make sense for it to have made a lot of mistakes that later sci-fi would learn from. Predictably, Bender's going to be made the new robot devil because the preacher robot needs to fill the void. This is a great satire, having him think he needs there to be a devil to keep people coming to his church. Surprisingly, Bender betrayed his friends, tricking them into becoming his slaves with a birthday card contract. They wouldn't have agreed to sign it in blood. Bender's given a doctor's note from someone telling him to excuse him from torture, and that happens a lot. And the robots are enjoying themselves there. And one asks Bender for a drink. Bender calls him Sir uncharacteristically and is warned that they're not taking Bender of all people seriously. It doesn't seem like this is taking good advantage of his character. And he kicks Bender for not giving him ice, and Bender somehow acts like a pushover afterwards. Then he realizes Fry's right. He shouldn't have needed to be told that. Why would Fry tell him you're welcome? He's really loyal to him for no reason. I get that Bender missed his friends and that's why I made them stay here to give him company, but I wish we were told that so he wouldn't look like he did this terrible thing to them for no reason. He actually enslaved them in the show too. Bender says he'll have to get creative if they all have doctor's notes, instead of just disregarding the notes like literally anyone else would do in his position. So he still cares about their well-being. So he tells the robots he picked up premium oil and it's at the end of his walkway. So he tricks them into going somewhere to get static shocked and tortured by Fry's rapping in some bad math. I get why Bender would want to get back at them for being mean to him. And if they're in robot hell, they're probably too evil to deserve Bender pampering them in a nice place. But still, that would have been the nicer thing to do. So the robots begged to go back to regular torture, and it turns out Leela hasn't seen Bender all night. Fry finds a trail that leads to a wall and amazingly assumes Bender went through a wall like a ghost. Well, he's in the future, and seen plenty of things that'd be really hard to get used to from his perspective. Leela tells them to help her find a switch on the wall, and they find a secret door leading out of robot hell. She smartly says that they could just escape now and stop being slaves, but Fry says there's no fun in that, and tells her where to go, and she's actually loyal enough to follow him to a soup kitchen that Bender's working at. He gets thanked by robots for the robot cooking he's making, and he even followed a cookbook, but it was a Martian one, and he didn't adjust for Earth gravity. So the robots get sucked into a black hole of bisque they somehow decided to eat. This kind of confusing writing happens way too often. That's why I'm not enthusiastic to read new issues of this comic like I was with the Rick and Morty one, where it seemed guaranteed to be good. Why did Bender go to a soup kitchen? Leela and Fry lampshade this, and he runs away from them. Bender goes to the robot church, and the robots freak out, causing the preacher to pay Bender and tell him to drop by anytime. Aside from the enslaving of his friends, Bender's being a lot more productive in this job. I have a bad feeling that the donations only go to the preacher's church in his pockets though, since it's a cynical future. Bender tries to slow his friends down for no reason by spilling oil that he slips on, and he asks them to help him up. Bender says that while being king of all evil was cool for a while, doing it 24/7 just took all the fun out of it. No wonder Scourge quit being a king. I love that he said this. So, he got bored, because he was expected to act like the bad guy all the time as a job, which isn't the same as doing it for a hobby. So he ended up sneaking out at night to work at a soup kitchen just for a change of pace, which would have been wonderful if he wasn't a terrible cook who's apparently too stubborn to just get himself reprogrammed to be an amazing chef. He could download all the information to his brain, but no. He says he'd love to go back to the way things were, and once again, Robot Devil very conveniently happens to be in the right place at the right time. But it makes sense that he's here this time because he wanted his job back. So he was stalking Bender before to stay close to him. Realistically, he faked his death to get a few weeks of fun in the sun because his job drains him. He jokes that he literally went vacationing in the sun, even though that'd kill anybody, future or not. And thanks Bender for taking over, and says he'll take the key back now. Then because they left the door open, all of the robots escaped. Who cares? They'll be back. In fact, the Robot Devil says that's what the Sin Magnet is for, which attracts truly evil robots. And Amy for some reason. I guess she has some metal in her body. No, instead of her being a cool robot on the inside, the day planner in her pocket has been embezzling from Planet Express. Bender hopes he's free to go, and the Robot Devil laughs, making us think that the predictable thing will happen where he won't let them go because he's evil. But then he catches me off guard, saying that he just remembered a joke Robot Hitler told him this afternoon. And yes, they're free to go. That was actually pretty amusing. Jokes are the best when they're an actual surprise. He also tells them to not forget the sin, so that's why he's letting them go. I always wondered why someone even built a Robot Devil, since they'd have nothing to gain from it. And I don't remember it being explained that a wizard made him, and that's how he's able to be immune to the sun. But I guess they just built him out of spite. And it makes sense because there's a lot of spiteful people. It's always been confusing that we don't know where he came from. Then after they leave, a short robot shows up and says he's traveled all over the world, and according to his sensors, Bender's the reincarnation of the robot Buddha. So robots do have souls, go figure. So robots want Bender to lead them to robot nirvana. I guess they don't know that he's evil. It turns out the robot just wanted an excuse to break the law because he happily started drive-by looting just because he was told to. This story was about Bender getting fired for accidentally almost getting his friend sick with his cooking, which could have believably happened regardless of whether he went to that shop and got smallpox as a spice, because we know he's a bad cook. So that whole scene at the shop didn't actually need to exist. Why would a smallpox be there as a spice for him to use? So after he gets fired, and somehow gets hired for a bunch of jobs and doesn't even try to do them well, the robot devil conveniently finds him. I guess since he wanted to fake his death for a vacation, he deliberately went to look for Bender, so of course he found him. So, intuitively for the evil character, Bender replaces the robot devil. But for some reason, the same guy who was evil enough to enslave his friends in robot hell on a whim and on Osiris got bored of constant evil and started trying to work at a soup kitchen as a change of pace. But he sucks at that. And then everything goes back to normal. I'm glad we saw Bender get tired of the job instead of the story just ending with him ruling hell, because that would have been a waste of a concept. This way stuff actually got done with the idea. But it still feels out of character that he would be a pushover who would agree to let robots use him as a waiter, because he's supposed to be evil.